At exactly 11:47 p.m., on a moonless Persian Gulf night, 12 Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps speedboats materialized from the darkness, moving at 40 knots toward the narrowest choke point in the world's most important body of water. No running lights, no radio contact, just 12 fiberglass hulls packed with rocket-propelled grenades, heavy machine guns, and young men who had been told tonight was the night they changed the balance of power in the Middle East. They were heading for the US and Nimitz, and they had no idea that the ship they were charging had already known they were coming for 11 minutes. The Strait of Hormuz is 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. Every single day, roughly 20% of the world's oil supply passes through that gap, 17 million barrels, enough petroleum to heat Europe through an Arctic winter. Control that strait, or even credibly threaten it, and you hold a knife to the throat of the global economy. Iran had spent 4 decades building a strategy around that reality. Small boats, swarm tactics, asymmetric warfare designed to overwhelm American sensor networks and create enough chaos to force a political crisis. Tonight was the field exam. The answer the Nimitz gave them would be studied in every naval war college on Earth for the next 20 years. The USS Nimitz had been operating in the Persian Gulf for 61 days by the time that radar contact appeared. She was the lead ship of a strike group that included 2 guided missile cruisers, 3 destroyers, and a fast attack submarine running silent somewhere beneath the keel of the formation. Together, this collection of American firepower represented roughly $28 billion in defense investment and the combat experience of nearly 8,000 sailors and aviators. The Nimitz herself is a monument to a different era of naval architecture. Unlike the newer Ford class, she runs on 2 Westinghouse, a 4-Dolly nuclear reactors that have been pushing her through the world's oceans since 1975. She was old by naval standards. She was not slow by any standard that matters. Her air wing that evening included 18 S/A-18 Super Hornets, 6 EA-18G Growler electronic warfare aircraft, and 4 E-2D Hawkeye airborne early warning planes, the last category being the detail that would matter most before midnight arrived. Iran's plan was built on a doctrine they'd been refining since the Taker War of the 1980s. Swarm attack. 30 or more small boats hitting simultaneously from multiple vectors, moving fast enough that radar systems would struggle to prioritize targets while human operators became overwhelmed by the sheer volume of threats. The calculations looked clean on paper. In practice, they required one critical assumption to hold true, that the Americans wouldn't see them coming early enough to think. That assumption was already dead before the boats left port. 1:36 p.m., an E-2D Hawkeye, circling at 25,000 feet, 40 miles south of the Nimitz, caught the first thermal signature. Not radar. Heat. The AN/APS 145 radar system on the Hawkeye is remarkable for what it sees, but on a night this dark and this warm, the sensor operator was running passive, infrared alongside active radar. 12 small fiberglass hulls generate almost no radar return. 12 high-performance marine engines pushing 40 knots generate a heat signature you cannot hide. The contact report reached the Nimitz's Combat Information Center within 40 seconds. The duty officer stared at the display and immediately understood 2 things. First, these were not fishing vessels. Fishing boats don't form into a 12-ship tactical wedge at midnight. Second, whoever had planned this operation didn't know about the Hawkeye's southern orbit. The response was measured, deliberate, and began before any of the 12 boats had crossed into the outer defensive ring. The strike group tightened formation. Both Ticonderoga-class cruisers rotated their FPI-1B radar systems to active track and began building fire solutions. The submarine, whose exact position remains classified to this day, received updated tactical data via underwater acoustic relay and adjusted its own posture accordingly. 4 Super Hornets sat on deck with engines turning, pilots strapped in, waiting for the word that might come or might not. Nothing was fired. Nothing was announced. The Americans simply waited, watched, and prepared with the calm efficiency of people who had rehearsed this specific scenario roughly 500 times. The ORGC boats had no idea they were already in the center of the trap. 11:51 p.m. The formation split. Classic swarm doctrine. 8 boats continued on the primary approach vector toward the Nimitz. 4 broke left toward the cruiser USS Princeton, accelerating to what radar measured as 47 knots, faster than previously assessed maximum speed for this class. Someone had upgraded the engines. That information alone was worth the entire evening's fuel costs in intelligence value. The Princeton's commanding officer had 4 minutes before the 4-boat element reached effective RPG range. She used 3 of them. The ship's /SPS-67 surface search radar was already painting all 4 contacts when the decision came down from Strike Group Command. Active jamming, non-lethal deterrence, warning shots if closure continued past a defined line. The EA-18G Growlers did their work first. Operating from 18,000 feet, 2 Growlers began pumping jamming energy across the frequency bands that IRGC speedboats use for interboat communication and GPS guidance. It was the electronic equivalent of someone screaming into a telephone. The boat's communications degraded rapidly. Coordination between boat commanders began breaking down. The perfect tactical formation started showing gaps. One boat slowed, then another. The psychological effect of suddenly losing radio contact with your wingman, in the dark, at 47 knots, on a collision course with a warship you can't see clearly, is not captured in any tactical manual. It registers in the chest. 2 boat commanders made the same calculation independently and reduced speed, which broke the timing of the swarm approach in a way that no defensive weapon could have achieved. But the other 10 kept coming. 11:56 p.m., the Nimitz activated her NATO Sea Sparrow missile battery and rotated 2 Phalanx CIWS mounts to face the approaching threat axis. The Phalanx system, the same R2D2-looking gun mount that featured in the carrier's defense, doesn't wait for permission once it's authorized into autonomous mode. Its Q-band radar tracks incoming objects and calculates a firing solution in the time it takes a human being to blink. 20mm tungsten at 4,500 rounds per minute. The math of what it would do to a fiberglass speedboat at 500 meters is not complicated. The warning shots came next. 2 destroyers fired across the bow of the lead element, not at the boats, but close enough that the water columns rose higher than the boat's radio antennas. The message required no translation. You are inside our engagement perimeter. The next round will not be a warning. This is where the plan unraveled. The ORGC operation had been designed around a specific assumption that American rules of engagement in the Strait would force a delay in weapons release long enough for the swarm to close within minimum range of the Phalanx system, inside 150 meters, where even that weapon has reduced effectiveness. It was a tactically clever idea built on a political miscalculation. The boat's commanders had not been briefed on the specific rules of engagement issued to the Nimitz strike group that evening. Those rules had been updated 36 hours prior following a classified intelligence assessment. The update significantly shortened the authorization window for defensive weapons release. The Nimitz's tactical action officer had authority to engage at a distance that the IRGC planners had assumed was safe. That gap, between what Iran's intelligence believed American doctrine permitted and what American doctrine actually permitted that night, was where the entire operation failed. The 8 boats on the primary approach axis were now inside 800 meters. At 40 knots, that was less than 40 seconds from the outer hull of the carrier. The phalanx mounts were locked. The Sea Sparrow battery had firing solutions. S/A-18s above had weapons-free authorization, pending a single command, and the IRGC formation, now partially blinded by jamming, partially broken by communications loss, and entirely within the engagement envelope of 7 separate weapon systems, did something that no amount of tactical planning had anticipated. They stopped. 11:59 p.m., the lead boat cut throttle so hard that its bow wave overtook it. The 7 remaining approaching boats followed within seconds. At 600 meters from the Nimitz's hull, the formation went dead slow, sitting in the water in the darkness with American weapon systems tracking every inch of their position. For approximately 90 seconds, nothing moved except the ocean. The Nimitz continued on course. Not a degree of heading change. The carrier displaced 100,000 tons and was not in the habit of yielding water to 12 speedboats. Her screws pushed her forward at 15 knots. The distance between carrier and boats closed not because the boats advanced, but because the carrier simply did not stop. Inside the lead boat, a decision was being made by a man whose name remains unknown, whose rank is unconfirmed, and who understood in that moment that the operation had reached the point where the next choice was permanent. Continue, and American weapons would speak before the boats reached effective firing range. Withdraw, and the mission failed. He chose withdrawal. All 12 boats turned south simultaneously at 12:01 a.m. and accelerated back toward Iranian territorial waters. The entire evolution, from first radar contact to withdrawal, had lasted 25 minutes. The Nimitz had not changed course, had not changed speed, had not fired a single round in anger, but had placed every available weapon system into firing position and held them there with the patience of people who were in absolutely no hurry, because they knew the geometry of the situation better than the men in the boats did. Heath Ledger, as always, tells the clearest story. Iran expended approximately $380,000 in operational costs for the mission: fuel, maintenance, pre-mission logistics, and the intelligence preparation that went into the operations planning. 12 boats returned with no tactical achievement, no territorial gain, no political leverage. The Strait of Hormuz remained open. Oil tankers continued their transit. Markets opened the next morning without incident. The Americans spent approximately $210,000 in operational costs, primarily aviation fuel for the Hawkeye and Growler orbits, plus the readiness posture maintained by the strike group throughout the engagement window. The EA-18G jamming mission alone yielded an estimated $40 to $60 million in actionable electronic intelligence, frequency data, communications protocols, boat performance parameters, and formation doctrine that had never been observed in a live operational context. Every Iranian radio transmission from the previous 25 minutes was captured, catalogued, and sent to analysts at locations that will never appear in any press release. The engine acoustic signatures of all 12 vessels were recorded by the submarine below and cross-referenced against existing databases. The upgraded speedboat performance, those engines pushing 47 knots, was a discovery worth more than the entire mission cost. Someone had been supplied with better hardware than American intelligence had previously assessed. That supply chain became a priority follow-up target within 48 hours. The 4 boats that had broken toward the Princeton and subsequently slowed, their commanders were later identified through signals intelligence. Their hesitation under jamming conditions told analysts something critical about IRGC training standards and command culture that no satellite image could have revealed. The strategic consequences extended well beyond that single night. Iranian naval planners had built their sworn doctrine on the assumption that political constraints would give speedboats enough time to reach effective engagement range. That assumption was now known to be false, and worse, was known to be false. Every subsequent IRGC wargame had to account for the possibility that American rules of engagement were tighter than publicly stated. That uncertainty, that permanent doubt, changed Iranian operational planning in ways that are still rippling through their doctrine today. This story is not about 12 boats that turned around in the dark. It is about the gap between what an adversary believes is true and what is actually true, and the enormous strategic value of keeping that gap as wide as possible. The Nimitz didn't defeat the IRGC that night by being faster or more powerful, although she was both. She defeated them by knowing more. The Hawkeye's southern orbit, the updated rules of engagement, the Growler's jamming frequencies, the submarine's acoustic library. Each piece of knowledge represented a decision made months or years before that night, a budget line defended in some appropriations meeting, a training evolution completed on a Tuesday afternoon when it felt like routine. Modern naval warfare is won in the spaces between engagements. In the intelligence gathered, the doctrine updated, the capability quietly upgraded while the adversary is still planning around last year's assessment. Iran came to the Strait of Hormuz that night believing they understood the playing field. They were operating on a map that was already out of date. The Nimitz sailed on. The oil tankers followed. The strait stayed open. Some lessons are taught with fire. This one was taught with a weapon system that never had to fire, a carrier that never changed course, and 12 boats full of young men who got to go home because someone on the other side of the dark water had done their homework. What do you think Iran's naval planners should have assessed differently? And do you believe swarm tactics could ever overcome a fully networked carrier strike group, or has that tactical window permanently closed? Drop your take in the comments. If this breakdown was useful, subscribe. There are more of these stories where this one came from.